Day lunch, and he decided to give little Susan a hard time. At the dinner table, he said to her, "So, what did you study in Sunday school today?" "We talked about Jonah being swallowed by a big fish," she answered. "Do you think that story about Jonah is true?" Susan responded, "Of course it's true." Uncle Bill pushed a little more. "You really believe a man can be swallowed by a big fish, stay inside him all that time, come out of there still alive? You really believe that all that can be true?" She declared, "Absolutely. This story is in the Bible. We studied about it in Sunday school today." Then Uncle Bill asked, "Well, Susan, can you prove to me that this story is true?" She thought for a moment, and then she said, "Well, when I get to heaven, I'll ask Jonah." Uncle Bill smiled and he said, "Well, what if Jonah's not in heaven?" She looked at him with a smile and she said, "Well, if he's not in heaven, then you can ask him." What we see with Uncle Bill in this story is true in many of us. We have a hard time accepting the things that we cannot explain. When a miracle happens, we try to think of ways that we can explain it, that in some way it might have just been a coincidence. We try to look at it logically. We might have a complete different reaction. We will either try to see the miracle logically or we'll be amazed that the miracle even happened. I don't know if it's that we're amazed that God would choose to bless our lives or if we're amazed that God did the miracle. This latter way of reacting to a miracle is how Peter reacted in our text today. Mark chapter 11. Very clearly see Jesus performing a miracle here. Although we scratch our heads a little bit at this miracle, why would Jesus curse the fig tree for not having figs if it wasn't fig season? This tree didn't do anything wrong. It didn't have figs on it because it wasn't time for figs to be on it. So why did Jesus curse the tree? Typically, when dealing with curses, we tend to think that such things only come when someone or something is doing bad or evil. Such people who carry out the bidding of the demonic realm, we would certainly think they would have the curse of God on their lives. It was Cain who received a curse by God because he killed his brother Abel. This we think is appropriate because Cain did evil and therefore brings the curse of God onto his life. We feel the same with Aaron's sons when they offered strange fire in their sacrifice, and the fire of God consumed them. They did what they wanted to do in their worship, and it was not acceptable to God. And this, by the way, is a lesson we need to pay attention to. For we need to make sure we don't turn our worship of God into what we want to do. We should seek to have worship that is acceptable to God instead of convenient for ourselves. But when this curse of death was handed out to Nadab and Abihu, we understand that it was because of the evil that they had done. But what evil did this tree do? Sure, it didn't have figs on it to feed our Lord and Savior when he was hungry. But it wasn't time for the figs to be on it. Why would Jesus curse such a tree? Not only that, but when Jesus and the disciples passed that tree again later on, they found that it was withered from the roots. Now, what did this tree do that required for its destruction? problem that we have about this tree is actually due to how we're viewing the situation. You see, we simply cannot give the tree human qualities. We cannot lift the tree up to the stature of any human being. The moment that we lift a plant or an animal up to the level of humanity or even over the level of humanity, we are in error in our thinking. Back in Genesis chapter 1, when God created man, he gave man the rule over animals and the plants of the earth. Mankind was placed above all the other living things of creation. And when we understand this and we keep the relationship between man and creation in the correct context, we will find that Jesus did nothing wrong here. Now, if Jesus would have cursed a person even though they did nothing wrong, then Jesus would have been in error. But Jesus is not doing that here. He cursed a tree. This tree withers not because of anything that it did wrong. This tree withers so that Jesus could teach the disciples an important lesson. You see, it was important to note that the tree was green and not in season for figs for us to understand this was not a diseased tree. This was not a tree that only needed a little more time before it would wither because of some disease that prevented it from producing fruit during the fruit producing season. This is what makes this miracle so grand. This was a very healthy tree when Jesus curses it. Yet when we visit verse 20, we find the tree withered from its roots. This was not caused by some worm or some other pest. This was not caused by some lightning strike that could bring instant death to a tree. This was not caused by some illness that the tree might have suffered. It was alive and well just moments before. No, this tree withered from the roots because it was cursed by Jesus. There's no way that anyone can use logic to explain how this tree went from being vitally alive to being withered from the root, except in saying it had something to do with Jesus cursing it. This truly does show the power of Jesus. And because of Colossians 1, we know that Jesus was a part of creation, where God spoke things into existence. Here, the miracle is that Jesus speaks and causes the death of something. This makes perfect sense. You see, there were times when yours truly did things in my youth that went against the rules. I occasionally would be one to challenge the rules or push my limits. I didn't know how many hundreds, maybe thousands of times I heard my mom say, "I brought you into this world and I could take you out of it." She was merely reminding me of the relationship we had, and I was not to disrespect that. She was the mom and I was the child. She was over me and not the other way around. Here, Jesus is merely reminding us that he brought us into the world and he can take us out. We see God do this several times in the Old Testament. We've already discussed Nadab and Abihu with the unauthorized fire in their sacrifices. What about when the ground opened up and swallowed all those who opposed Moses? What about Ananias and Sapphira in the New Testament where they dropped dead in front of Peter for lying? How about Sodom and Gomorrah? Because of their wickedness, God brought down burning sulfur. Of course, we can never forget the earth-altering global flood that wiped everyone but 8 people out. See, as we view this event that happened with this fig tree, the miracle is in the fact that Jesus spoke cursing the tree, and with mere words, the tree withered by the roots, and it died. Because the disciples were around to see Jesus curse the tree, it caused for a reaction out of them when they came up to the tree the second time. Look at verse 21. Jesus spoke, and the next time they see the tree, it is withered from its roots. I can see Peter getting all excited as he talks to Jesus about what happened to the tree. I can also see Jesus calmly responding as if he already knew this happened. It's almost as if Peter forgets who Jesus really is. I guess we cannot fault him for that, but we oftentimes forget who God is. How many times have we prayed for something and it came true, And that resulted in our amazement. How many great things have happened in our lives that we have understood came from God's hands, and we stand in amazement? We truly can understand the amazement that Peter exhibited. Jesus curses the fig tree, and the next time they see it, it's withered from its roots. As Peter excitedly reports about the tree, Jesus calmly responds. In his response, it's where we see the lesson for today. Look at verses 22 to 24. Faith in God. How many times are we like the man who came to Jesus because his boy was demon possessed? You remember? We covered it in chapter 9 last year. A man brought his demon possessed son to the disciples of Jesus, but they could not drive the demon out of the boy. The father said that the demon would often seize the boy and throw him to the ground. The boy would foam at the mouth, gnash his teeth, and become rigid. There were even times that demons would cause for the boy to be thrown into the fire to try to kill him, or into the water to try to drown him. Remember now? Do you remember that the father asked Jesus to do something if he could? And Jesus points that out by repeating the man's word in a question. And then Jesus said, everything is possible for him who believes. The man responded with, I do believe, but help me overcome my unbelief. He was wanting to see a miracle. He wanted to see his boy healed by Jesus to be able to overcome this little bit of unbelief. We can understand that because oftentimes we too want to see some great things from God. We feel that if we see this great thing that our unbelief will disappear. But Jesus says, have faith in God. Maybe we shouldn't be looking for something amazing from God in order to fully believe. Maybe we should look at God for who he is and realize God is in control. Jesus says that if we say to a mountain to throw itself into the sea, it will happen if we don't doubt when we ask for it. Now, many of us doubt that such a thing will happen. We doubt it for one of two reasons. The first reason some doubt that something like this can happen is because they've forgotten the nature of God. Sure, we like to say that God is omnipotent or all-powerful, but because we operate with a limited strength, we think that God does as well. The other day, it's been about 3 or 4 weeks now, I just decided to play a little 1v1 basketball against Luke. This was before I hurt my back. That means I was playing a real game of basketball with all the rules in place, just me against Luke. And after the second game, I had to stop playing. This is unusual for me. I could usually play 5 to 10 games before I need to stop for a break. But on that day, I had to quit after just 2 games. Luke said this happened because I'm getting old. But it really happened because I'm still trying to figure out all the changes that need to be made in my diet because I've been diagnosed with diabetes. I've drastically cut back my carb intake because carbs turn into sugars. But because I had little carbs in my system, that means I had a very limited amount of strength. So while Luke thinks I'm getting old, the truth of the matter is my strength was limited because of the amount of carbs I took in. And did I forget to mention that this old man, as Luke likes to call me, dominated that young man at basketball? You see, because we operate with a limited power, we transfer that onto God. But we can't do that. If we believe that God is all powerful, then there's nothing that God cannot do. If God were to play basketball against me, I wouldn't be able to score a point, no matter how hard I tried. And as I would wind down in my strength and endurance, God would just keep right on going, even longer than the Energizer Bunny. It is impossible for a mountain to be thrown into the sea. A lot of people will say that, but is it? No, it's not impossible. In the science realm, we can go to the eruption of Mount St. Helens in 1980. This eruption showed that mountains can move. Now, some will argue it wasn't a typical mountain, it was a volcano. But it does go to show that things like this are possible. And God can do it even without an explanation. So when looking at Jesus' answer, we either see that we forget the power of God in making miracles happen, or we simply do not believe that what we ask for will be done. We have doubt in our hearts. Jesus says this is not to be a characteristic that we have in our prayer lives. Jesus says that when we ask for something in prayer, we should believe that we will receive it and it'll be ours. Now, of course, we know that Jesus is merely focusing on the ability of God to answer prayers here. God has the ability to answer any prayer, but the truth of the matter is, we have to remember that God's ways are not our ways. He may answer our prayer differently than we expected. Also, according to James chapter 4, he writes, sure that what we are asking isn't for our own personal gain, but rather that it's for the gain of God's kingdom. Stop being so surprised when God accomplishes what you've prayed for. I stand up here and I say that to you, yet I still, like Peter, get amazed when I see God working. Example that we can see comes to us in Acts chapter 12. This is a chapter that tells how King Herod wanted to please the Jews. So James, the brother of John, was put to death by the sword. And Peter was put in prison. He was going to face trial after the Passover. But God intervened. The night before Peter was to face trial, an angel paid a visit to him. The chains that held him to the two guards just fell off. Peter followed this angel out of the prison. He walked right past the other guards, and the iron gate to the city just opened by itself. After Peter and the angel walked the length of one street, the angel disappeared. And Peter went to the house of Mary, the mother of John Mark. This is the part of the story that I like. It just so happened that at this time of night, the church had gathered at Mary's house, and they were holding a prayer vigil. They were earnestly praying for Peter, knowing that the next day he would face trial. Knowing that James, the brother of John, had already been put to death, they prayed the same fate would not fall on Peter. When Peter got to the house, he knocked at the outer entrance. A servant girl named Rhoda came to see who it was. When she recognized that it was Peter, she became so overjoyed, she forgot to let him in. She immediately ran inside to let the believers know that Peter was at the door. And while she was excited about this event, the others inside didn't share the same emotions. They figured that she was out of her mind because Peter was chained between two guards and had other guards that were guarding him as well. There was no way they would just let him go, and definitely not at such a time. But when Rhoda persisted that Peter was at the door, they figured that he had met the same demise that James, the brother of John, had, and Peter's angel was at the door. But when they finally thought to open the door, they saw Peter standing there, and they were astonished. The question is, why were they astonished? They probably had the same amazement that Peter had when he saw the withered tree. Jesus says we need to have faith in God. We need to trust that God has the power to do anything, and that God is looking to answer prayers. The church was praying for Peter, and Peter was set free. Yet the church was astonished when they saw Peter freed from prison. Listen, God is able to do immeasurably more than all we ask or imagine. We just need to have faith in God. If we have faith in God and we're sold out on working for his kingdom, we'll be able to see God working in mighty ways as long as we believe what we ask for in prayer. We took a look this morning at the miracle where Jesus cursed a fig tree and it ended up withering at the roots. Peter showed some amazement as he tells Jesus that the tree was withered, and Jesus responds by simply telling him to have faith in God. Having faith in God is where we need to focus this morning. Not so much on the miracle or why Jesus would curse a tree for not having fruit when it wasn't in season. Not so much on Peter's response and amazement at the events of the tree. We need to focus on the fact that we probably need to have a bit more faith in God. So much so that we can tell a mountain to throw itself into the sea with belief in our prayer. So much so that we will know that what we ask for we will receive because of our belief. We truly have to wrap our heads around this idea that God can do anything. As long as our prayers are not for our own pleasures, but rather for the furthering of God's kingdom, God is able to do more than we can ask or imagine. So the next time you come to that challenge, the next time you come to that crazy situation, the next time you come to that impossible person, remember to have faith in God.